Hi friends, it's Sister Marla Clercx. A number of years ago, a friend and I decided to camp at one of the Apostle Islands, and we borrowed a boat from a gentleman and took off from the Red Cliff Point. At that time, the minimum size boat that you could use on Lake Superior was a 12-foot motorized boat, and that was what we set out in. We left in early afternoon, and it was a beautiful, calm, sunny day. We were heading to Oak Island, a little ways out on Lake Superior, and as we were puttering along, the sky suddenly turned dark and the wind picked up, and in no time at all, we were out on open water with 2+ foot waves just battering our little boat. Water was pouring over the sides of the boat, and I just kept thinking that this was how I was going to meet God. As water came in the boat and saturated all of our camping equipment, I looked down and realized I had heavy hiking boots on and knew I was probably going to sink rapidly. We didn't end up getting to Oak Island because it was too difficult, too treacherous to try to get there. So my friend turned the boat around, which was also not an easy task to do, and coming at the waves sideways was drenching us even more. We ended up making it to Basswood Island and found a CCC camp there where we could get into one of the little old huts and not have to worry about the wetness of our sleeping bags and tent and such. In the morning, as we were making breakfast, a group of gentlemen came up and asked who we were, and when we told them, they said, they were glad to meet us because they'd been looking for us the day before. When we hadn't met our destination or our reservation on Oak Island, the Coast Guard was sent out to find us, but they also had to turn around because the water was too treacherous. So they were happy to find us at Basswood, and it just struck us and sent a shiver down our spines that's how bad that water had been. That's how bad that sea had turned. And I think of that story when we look at today's gospel of Jesus sending the disciples out to the other side of the lake. And as they're out there, their boat becomes tossed about. The winds pick up, the waves are crashing, and there's fear that overtakes them. And Jesus comes walking out, and of course at first they think he's a ghost. But then he comes into the boat and calms, and he invites Peter to walk on water. But of course Peter's faith diminishes and he begins to sink, and Jesus saves him. I don't believe that God was in the storm. I don't believe that God was testing our faith, even though the whole time we were going up and slapping down on the waves, I was praying the Our Father and the Hail Mary and probably making some promises about turning my life around if I survived or some such thing. But anyway, God wasn't the noise. God was the calm. God was the gratitude and the relief of having made it to shore. God was the gratitude and the relief the next morning on the faces of those who discovered that we had made it safely to a different destination. Elijah reminds us, too, that God is in the quiet. He wasn't in the wind. He wasn't in the earthquake. He wasn't in the fire, but he was in the whisper. He's there when we calm ourselves, when we allow ourselves to hear that voice of God, when we don't get caught up in the noise of our own lives or allow the noise around us and some of those difficult struggles around us to be the loudest voice. I think of our brothers and sisters in Menasha and the surrounding area who experienced the devastation of the tornado last week. And God wasn't in the tornado. God was in the quiet helping hands and voices and hearts of those who came to their aid, of those who knew them, of those who did not know them, but came to make sure that they knew that they were cared for, that they knew that they were not alone. God was in that quiet whisper. So friends, as we look at our lives and as each of us experiences at some point in our lives difficult moments, storms, things that seem out of our control, things that seem devastating, to remember that God is not in that noise. God is not in the noise of our hearts. God is in the quiet. God is in the calm. And God invites us to return to that quiet and that calm to truly find Him there. I remember once reading a powerful statement that said, "Don't tell God how big your storm is. Tell the storm how big your God is." Don't tell God how difficult your life is, how big your struggle is. Tell the struggle and the storm and the difficulty how big your God is. And then sit there before God in silence, listening to that whisper, listening to God's voice through those who desire to help us, listening to God's voice calling us to center ourselves in God's peace, in God's love, and in God's mercy.